Welcome to the Southern Craft Woodshop. I'm Wes Lewis. A few weeks ago I was approached to build this shadow box for a corporal in the United States Marine Corps. As his time in the service is coming to an end, his unit decided to pitch in and have this shadow box made to commemorate his service and accomplishments in the Marine Corps. I too would like to thank him, as well as all the men and women who currently wear or have worn any number of uniforms that protect our great country. Thank you so very much for your service. Now, let me show you how I built this shadow box. I began by creating my drawings in CAD. Once I was satisfied with the layout, I ripped a few sticks of 3/4 inch maple, 1 1/4 inch by 12 inches for the front frame, and then I took them over to a good friend with the CNC for engraving. Once I got the parts back, I set up to make the 41 and 49 degree cuts that will give us our diamond shaped frame. I did this by first making a true 90 degree cut on my miter saw, then adjusting the bed to make a second cut at 41 degrees. Then I took this triangle block to my crosscut sled, lined up the block with my fence and my blade path, and I screwed it down. I'll make my 49 degree cuts first, so I laid out our parts in order, then marked the cut direction on each part. You'll notice I marked both the front and back of our top right and bottom left parts. Over to the crosscut sled, I'll take the two pieces that make up each seam. I'll line up my top left part first and make my cut. Then, paying attention to my marks that I made earlier, I'll flip the top right part over to make the cut face down. Then I'll repeat the same process for the bottom seam. It's important to note that I did make sure our blade was set at a true 90 degree angle before I began. Now for the 41 degree cuts at the left and right seams. I'll remove the screws from our triangle jig block, then flip it over and rotate it counterclockwise 90 degrees. This will change our angle from 49 degrees to 41 degrees. I want our outside dimension along each edge to be 11 7/8, so I'll transfer that dimension over to our part before setting up a stop block to keep each part consistent. Now it's just a matter of making sure each part gets cut in the correct orientation. And we'll do a quick dry fit to make sure all of our seams are coming together to our liking. Next, we'll need our parts for our back frame. I'll take some 3/4 by 3/4 maple strips and I'll mark the cut side edge. Then at the miter saw, I'll cut a 41 degree angle on one end of each piece, keeping the marked edge up. Now, you're going to ask why I didn't do this at the crosscut sled earlier with the other parts, and to be honest, I just didn't plan very well, or I would have. Anyway, I'll take one of our cut pieces and line up the 41 degree cut with one of our front frame pieces and give myself about 1/8 of an inch of front overhang. I'll flip the two parts over and make a mark for our second cut. I'll then change our angle on our miter saw from 41 degrees over to 49 degrees and carefully set up a stop block. Now that our stop block is in place, we can finish making our miter cuts for our back frame. We'll attach our back frame to our front frame with 1-inch screws, so I want to pre-drill and countersink 2 holes in the back of each frame part. And when I'm done, I'll remove any burrs on the back side with a couple of strokes on some 120 grit sandpaper. Now, both our back frame and our front frames will need a recess to receive either a 1/4 inch back panel or our 1/8 inch glass front. I'll do that at the table saw using my hardwood rip blade and a couple of passes to get them the width I'm looking for. For our back frame, I'll cut a rabbet approximately 5/8 by 5/16 to receive our 1/4 inch back. Then on our front frame, our rabbet will be approximately 3/8 by 3/16. Now that we have our parts cut and processed, it's time to start putting them together. First thing I want to do, I want to get everything in the order that it's going to be put together in. And we're going to take corner by corner and mark them out. A, B, B, and D. That'll keep us from getting confused and mess them up when we start putting them together. Now, another thing I'm going to do is I am going to cheat on putting these corners together. I'm on a good melamine table, which is nice and flat. Make sure I don't have any dust or debris in my seam. And I'm going to apply just a little bit of glue. And to keep these corners from walking, I'm going to clamp them together. And I'm just going to put a tack 3/4 into the joint. And I'll do the same thing for all 4 corners. All right, now we can remove our clamps. Take a damp rag, make sure there's not any glue residue left behind, and we'll set our face over to the side to dry. And now we can work on our box frame, and we'll put it together the same way. Well, there you have our front frame with the groove for the glass, and you have our box frame with the groove for the back. And we will look it over, see how it fits. And we're going to tack this into place, and then we'll come back with 1-inch screws in all of the countersunk holes and lock everything together. I'm not going to worry with putting glue in that seam. 8 screws and a couple of tacks should be plenty to hold it. But before we attach the box frame to the front frame, we're going to go ahead and sand a little bit. I want to break the corners, and I'm going to go ahead and go over all 4 of the seams on the front side. I'll hit the edges, and we'll put everything together. I'll double check the sanding. I may have to do a little more touch up right before we stain, and then we'll put a couple coats of polyurethane on. We've got our sanding done, and I'm going to put our front frame face down. And we are going to attach the box frame behind it. And we're going to make sure we get the reveal the same all the way around before we come back with 1-inch screws and permanently attach everything. And the last thing we need to do before we stain is I need to trace out the 1/4 inch back, and I'll also use that trace for the glass. There'll be some offsets involved, but I'm just going to run my pencil around the outside edge, and then we'll go over to the cross-cut sled to cut that out a little later. Now, I'm just using Minwax dark walnut, and I'm going to start by going around the outside first. And get that little bit of an edge between the back frame on the box frame and the front frame. Now on the front, because we have the engraving, got to use a lot of stain to get down in there. Come back and wipe a little bit. Set the stain to the side. Now I'm going to take some shop rags and try to blot what I can out of the engraving. And we need to get the inside of the box frame, because that will be visible also. Well, after we stained, I let our shadow box sit for a couple of hours to let the stain kind of flash off. And then last night I came out and put a couple of coats of polyurethane on, and then another coat first thing this morning. And it's pretty well dried. It's not completely cured, but it's tacked up enough to handle. I'm ready to cut our 1/4 inch back, and I need to measure the inside of the recess. If you'll remember, I traced all the way around, and I'm using those trace marks as a reference mark for my angle, but I need to get a good clear dimension, And I'm looking at 11 5/16. And 11 5/16 both ways. So I'll go over to the table saw. We'll set the fence at 11 1/4. I'm going to cut it just about a 1/16 shy, just to make sure we get a nice fit. Then I'll put the cross-cut sled on the table saw, and we'll cut our angle, then go back and use the fence to make our final cut. All right, now we want to check our fit to see how we did. And that is perfect. I'm going to have about a 1/16 of an inch all the way around. And now I want to back out, and I want to mark my locations where my existing screws are on all the sides. And we'll mark the top. All right, now I'm going to take some playing cards, start setting my gap all the way around. And I'm just taking 3 cards right now, all the way around. Now I'm just going to take one more card, that'll make 4 altogether. I'll slip it in here. That should tighten everything up. All right, that gets our back nice and tight. And I've only got about, I'm 3/4 altogether. Let's see, about right there. So I've only got about 5/8 maybe in here to get a screw. So I'm going to come down about 1 inch away from that last screw. Just going to give myself a small little pilot hole. I'm going to go ahead and run in some 3/4 inch wood screws. And I'm not going to sink them just yet. Now I can remove my playing cards. And I'm going to mark the inside, just so I know how I want to lay out a little bit later. I'm also going to give myself a mark pretty close to flush with the edge of the front frame. Now we can remove our screws. And you can see where our back frame is going to come to, as well as how much overlap we've got for our front frame. Now let's go ahead and take a dimension on that. Our front frame is going to hang in about 1 inch overall, so when we start doing our layout, we can base everything off of that 1 inch. Well, our first attempt at glass was a complete and utter failure. I took our back to the hardware store and got them to cut me a piece. I'm going to clean it up really good on both sides. And we'll come back before we seal it off and clean the back side one more time. But for now, I want to get any dust that's on there that might be difficult to remove later out of the way. And we're going to set the glass on the back side of the front frame in a bed of silicone. Now, if we have any squeeze out come out on the front side, we will simply let that set up. Then we'll take a razor blade and clean that up. We'll use a little firm pressure to set it down into place. And we'll put a little weight on it and set it aside to let the silicone cure. Now while we wait on our silicone to cure, we want to put a piece of felt on the front side of the back. And I'm just going to put that on with some spray adhesive and then trim the edges. All right. And now I'm just going to take our felt, loosely set it in place, remove my cardboard, make sure my table's clean. I'm going to press that down nice and firm. A little too firm on the table there. And we'll take our utility knife, trim the felt back flush to the edge of our back. We're going to fill this shadow box with rank, metals, a couple of coins, and a nameplate, and I'll do that with double-sided mount tape. Before I do that, if you'll remember, our front frame is going to take up an inch worth of the back area. So I'm going to take some 1 inch, which is actually about 15/16 painter's tape, and I'm going to go ahead and go around the outside perimeter just to help lay things out. Now I want to pre-tape everything that's going to be going into the box. But I'm going to leave the back side of the tape in place until we're ready to actually set it firm in place. I'm going to begin to dry fit, and we're starting with the metals up top. And I want to measure everything out as we go. Now we've measured everything out nice and square, and I'm going to give myself some indication marks at some areas that I want to come back to when we start mounting these into place. I'm going to set the nameplate out for just a second. Now I've got everything except the nameplate in place at the moment. I'm going to leave it out for just a minute until I get these coins in place. Good firm pressure. Make sure they're seated well. And for the nameplate, which I have the name blocked out. And we'll peel the tape off of the outside edge. And if I've got any lint or anything, I'll just take that tape and remove it off of the felt. And now our shadow box is just about ready to come together. I want to give the inside of our glass another really good cleaning before we put everything together. I want to make sure there's no smudges and no streaks left behind. Because if they are in there, they are going to stay in there. All right, now we're ready to put everything together. I'm going to take the tape off of the nameplate. Make sure everything is back where it's supposed to be. And I'm just going to tack a couple of screws in. Make sure everything looks all right. And it does. Now I'll run the rest of the screws all the way in. And the last thing we need to finish this off is somehow for them to hang it. And we'll put a little bracket right up here at the top. Well, that's going to wrap this shadow box up. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and stick around and watch this next video too.